Hi there, I'm James Osborne, the co-founder of the Recruitment Network, and this is the TRN Podcast. Every week, we unpack the strategies, the technologies, the processes and mindsets fueling today's top-performing recruitment agencies. We take a look behind the scenes of some great recruitment businesses, we listen to the real-life stories of those who have built those businesses, and we learn from some of the industry's greatest thought leaders to help you become both future fit and future relevant. So let's begin with this next episode of the TRM Podcast.
So we're going to make this a really interactive session, just sharing a few thoughts and observations and comments about what we've seen that's working. If we put it into context, we know that we're going through the biggest period of change that the industry has ever seen. I hear that again and again and again. And we're also convinced, and everything we see at TRN is that when people adapt what we call the Future Fit 16, as and evolve their model to be relevant and fit for purpose for the market as it is today, there is plenty of business to go at and plenty of opportunity to succeed. The other thing that is worth mentioning is that we have the financial model for recruitment business has evolved a little bit, and it is harder to make money, but very definitely possible to make money with staff costs increasing 10% year on year from quarter 124 to quarter 125, overheads going up, less dropping down to the bottom line. So it's incredibly important that we are smart about where we spend our money. And commission schemes is obviously a huge part of what we spend. So we're going to keep this open. If you have any questions, pop them into the chat. I'll do our best to get through them all. But let's start with a few questions to our seasoned panel. Mike, I'm going to start with you, if that's all right. You built your business. You went through hypergrowth and you exited via an MBO. What was at different stages of the journey? What was your approach to commission schemes and making it work for the business?
So I mean, it's about total comp that I always look at, but the commission's a bonus part in terms of just making sure that really you're driving the core disciplines around the hygiene factors of the business that you're trying to achieve. So I use something called the sort of reward triangle, and that for me is really important, that you start with what the core objectives are, whether you're a single operator through to 200 people, 300 people, whatever it might be, but be really clear on what the core things are you're trying to drive across the business, and then look at how the commission and bonus schemes across the organization fit with that. So it will change, every 6 months, 12 months, maybe more regular than that. But the one thing you can't do is keep on moving the commission schemes. So for me, I would always set up a framework at the beginning of the year with regards to a structure. And actually, Conquest have outlined a really interesting structure, which is around the structure of the schemes, thresholds, payment timings, and also payout ratios, and keeping that as your sort of structure in terms of how you create those commission schemes. Within the structure piece, for me, it's really important because I try and have a structure that I'd work to across the group. Or across the organisation, but then within it have variables, but not making it too complicated. I've seen so many commission schemes that have overcomplicated matters, and if you can't work it out in a simple Excel spreadsheet, it's not going to drive the right behaviours, in my opinion. So you can create a commission calculator, but it's got to just be very simplistic to understand for your consultants. I think within it, the key thing is that there's got to be consistency. So consultants, in my opinion, don't like shifting commission schemes every quarter, every 6 months, 12 months. They like certainty. However, with bonuses, if you create a bonus structure in there as well, you can have more flexibility to drive the right behaviours. So if you're trying to increase, let's say, consistency of billings, which is often a thing that we see in perm, people are having up highs and lows, why don't we bring in a bonus scheme for consistency of monthly billings, etc. If it's on contract and it's about growth, and I'm a great believer in separating perm and contract commission schemes, but if you're trying to incentivize contract growth, for example, then actually start to reward against growth of your book, or delta growth, as we always used to term it. So again, the key thing for me is trying to have a consistent structure that people understand how they're going to earn their money and can simply work it out. But secondly, also then having some variability that you can drive the right behaviours depending on where you are in your cycle. That might be quarterly, 6 monthly, it might be yearly. but you need to have an ability to change it to make sure that you're driving the right behaviours towards the end client, towards the end company goals.
Love it. So just can I ask everybody who's joining us on this call on that question of how complicated your scheme is? Can you just pop in the chat either yes, it's too complicated, your current scheme, instinctively, or no, you think it's really nice and simple the way that Mike described it? So just pop it in the chat. Yes means too complicated. No means it's pretty good. Just on that question of reviewing, Mike and Simon and Sam, what is the frequency for reviewing your scheme?
Annually for me. Sorry, I just slightly disagree with Mike. I think, in terms of needing to be responsive to and agile, I think once a year, it might only be a tweak, but I think annually. And I think emotionally letting people get too comfortable with schemes that might have been very generous in boom times. I think, the ability to regulate what's appropriate should be annual.
Okay.
So I just on that point, so I don't disagree in terms of the bulk of the commission in terms of for a 12-month period. So you're annually reviewing that, but bonuses to drive behaviours. That's where I'd have variability. So commission scheme, you know where you stand on the tiered commission structures if you're using tierings. But if you want to drive a certain behaviour, you're trying to drive new logos, then bring in some sort of bonus for new logos, but make it part of the OTE rather than just an add-on, so people are actually working towards it. That would be my view in terms of that's where I've seen the ability to pivot, especially as the market's changing so quickly. But the commission scheme, I don't disagree with you at all in terms of having that confidence that that it's going to be, you've got it mapped out, you know how you're building your plan, your desk, etc. towards it. I agree with that.
Churchy, your view on reviewing?
Yeah, I would review them once a year, always once a year. I'd have a real hard stop rethink when you're budgeting your next year or maybe even the next 2 or 3 years. Do it once a year, but have the ability to tweak things if things go, if you're getting your radars indicating the market's changed from where you expected it to go. But I'm with Mike on this in terms of, and I think probably Sam will be agreeable that it's probably the most disruptive thing you can possibly give to a sales team is to change it. So whenever you actually work out a new commission scheme, and I have one sent through to me over the weekend for a client I'm meeting tomorrow, and they want to change it quite radically across the piece for all the senior leaders and everybody else in the business. And it's in the middle of a year. So you have to really think long and hard about what it's going to do, how it's going to land. And in many cases, it's not actually worked through the P&L properly. So you have to balance essentially if you've got two teams or more than one team, if one team exceeds their target, by an extraordinary margin, and you're paying out on an accelerator, and two or three other teams are actually underperforming, is the business actually going to lose money? So you must run your commission schemes through a P&L, even if you're going to have to make some small tweaks to it, just to make sure that the balances are right and that you are properly rewarding people for what you can afford.
Okay, love it. Thank you. Just while you're on, Church, you advise so many businesses around sales strategy, BD strategy. What disconnect do you sometimes see between the scheme and the behaviours that are being driven?
There's quite often very little disconnect. I think the scheme will drive the behavior. So quite often you'll see the behavior is not what you expect because you haven't thought through the scheme properly, if you know what I mean. So if you incentivize, for example, and I've seen this happen a lot, and it's happening at the moment for a lot of smaller companies, incentivizing the first deal with a new client. So you get a bit, and maybe there's more commission involved with it, or there's a bonus associated with a new client, and of course that's commendable. But if that individual or those individuals also have existing clients and they're actually focusing on getting new ones, and it takes, as we all know, a lot more money, a lot more time to win a new client, you may end up losing the ones you've got if you're not looking after them properly. So yes, I very rarely see a disconnect between the commission scheme and the behavior. What I often see is a lack of thought about what the commission scheme will drive in terms of the behaviour.
Okay, love it. Sam, on your business and everything that you've been seeing with the members that you work with, the balance between getting the ultimate, the commission scheme that drives performance without it being cutthroat. How do you like to see it? What's worked for you?
I think just because you're right, nobody wants the cutthroat lone wolves out there, kind of, adding toxicity to the team. But I think it's more than the bonus scheme. And I think to Church's point, you've got to think about what are you trying to engender in your culture. So I personally would always pump for individual recognition with financial reward associated. But it might be that, some of the things we did around being very open and transparent with financial performance and what we were gunning for, and then putting in perhaps some incentive or reward or recognition when the team achieved that. I think was quite powerful. I think it's very difficult if you've got mate weights on a team. You very often get those who are, really moving heaven and earth to hit the number, feeling that perhaps not everyone else was doing quite as much to get there. I think that can breed disconnect. So I think, the interesting piece I'm seeing with a lot of companies I'm working with right now is where they've changed their operating model, and they're separating and moving away from being 360 is, the need to be very clear about attributable revenue. So of that fee, who's getting recognition for the origination, who's getting a recognition for maybe the deal management, who's getting recognition for the reward, and being consistent on that. And I think if you can get that piece right, so everyone feels they're getting a bit of a slice of the action and a bit of recognition, and you're consistent with it, I think that can pull the team together.
Okay, love it. Just a couple of questions come in. I'm going to deal with them as they come in. For permanent recruitment, what proportion of the fee charged do you recommend paying out in commission, and what conditions would you put around that?
I have a benchmark that I use. It obviously depends whether you're doing perm search and selection, where you're perhaps shedding out a very high proportion of the fees on a very small number of deals to individuals. But typically, the thing I always look for when I first see a P&L is, are we paying out more than 15% of the net fee income in variable commission? And it's one of the first things I look at. So I always try to keep below 15, and that means basically all of the variable pay that goes to the salesperson, the resourcer, the manager above it who's getting an override, just work it through the P&L to see how much of that is actually going out in variable commission. But it does depend on your model in your business, how much base salary you're paying out, whether you've got a threshold on the earnings. There's lots of sort of detail behind that, but that's the first thing I look at before I've asked any questions about the business.
15%.
Less than 15%. If it's on 15% or more, I'm a bit worried. I started to get into, if it's 15%, I'm starting to get worried, and I have to ask a lot more detailed questions about the business and how it's operating and why it's that high.
Yeah. Mike, you got a view on that?
I think it's so difficult to give a view on this because of the different operating models. Because often what we do when we set schemes up and we want to be competitive in the marketplace, whether it be perm or contract, we set our stall out saying we're going to pay upper quartile commissions, and we give nice chunky numbers out, and we say, right, we're going to pay 25%, 30%, whatever it might be. And that unfortunately sets your stall out, especially as you start to grow. And I've been bitten this way, we attract lots of people to come join us because of our commission schemes. And as you start to grow, salaries start to grow, your infrastructure starts to grow. All of a sudden you realize you can't maintain those. And actually what you're doing is you're trying to make sure that actually everyone is stepping up, but you also need to make sure that, and this is the challenge, why you need to look at these regularly, is because if your commission schemes are just going like that in line with billings, where does the fat come from for you as a business to reinvest? So I'm sat here as an investor, but I'm also sat there thinking, if I was a consultant, how would I respond to that? So there's almost got to be this growth that starts to create some fat in it for you to then reinvest elsewhere. And I've seen many mistakes made where you are setting your stall out just saying, we will always pay you X percentage of what you bring in. Now, that's great for surety, but also it causes quite a few challenges because, especially on contract and non-contract individuals going through, what you end up with is people just holding the book, especially if it's non-temp, so it's contract. They just sit there and they're just quite happily maintaining and basically just treading water. And actually, and this comes back to the points I was making right at the beginning. If you want growth, incentivize for growth. So if you've got a contract person or a perm person, you want to incentivize them to do better and better over what they did last year, incentivize them on the growth that they're predicting. Because otherwise what you'll end up with is just people who do the same to a certain level of their capacity. And what you want is you want to stretch people. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to give a direct answer to that because it's so difficult because of the target operating models, the splits you run, and the basic salaries. You know, you need to look at this variable piece constantly in terms of what's variable and what's fixed. In some businesses, the variable piece is very small, but they're paying a very high basic salary, and that's basically how they geared their business.
Question from Claire. Is it worth looking at total sales staff costs as a proportion of net fee income rather than variable commission costs to allow for a variety of business models?
Both.
There you go, Claire. No, but
What he said.
it's interesting what you're saying, Mike, because at TRN, as you know, we do a lot of benchmarking within the membership so that people can compare notes. We did a massive exercise a year ago about commission schemes, what everyone was doing. But it was only when you drill down below into the who's got what operating model to make the comparable relevant that it became really valuable.
And how many times have we all sat and heard, yeah, but you know, our competitors paying 30%, 35% on their upper tiers, where you go, but what's behind it? What basic salaries they're paying, what bonus schemes they're paying, what's the total comp package? So it depends what you're trying to drive. If you're trying to drive attraction and retention, and you're going to focus on Sam's point with regards to if we're going to pay up a quartile percentages, then you need to live and breathe that, and you're driving an individuality. So again, what you want to be famous for. There are businesses now that are paying complete, team packages, but that's their culture. They're not paying any individuals, but you have to drive a certain behaviour in that business.
Yeah, I mean, to give another sort of really weird one I came across, got involved in, and actually worked, is with account managers. So you've got an established individual with a whole set of accounts. Some of the commissions actually paid to the individual, and the accelerated part of the commissions paid to the individual 12 months after that placement survived inside that business, because the DNA of the company was to only, wherever possible, make placements into businesses of individuals that are really good fit for the company, because that was part of their DNA, their brand. They want to be recognized for placing good people in there. So they actually gave a kicker on the commission for when the individual they placed was there 12 months on from the time they placed them, which actually was a real driver for behavior. And another one that was in an accelerator, which was again unusual and happened quite a lot, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, was attach the kicker of commission to the NPS score you're getting from that person's desk and placements. And the kicker came in at maybe 10% above the commission or 10% below it if they fell below or above the NPS threshold, which is the net promoter score threshold that you're setting for that particular individual. So those are two variables on the commission that can be deployed, and there are many others, to help to drive that behavior that both Mike and Sam were talking about that you want to get out of the sales team.
Quick question on, I just want to go back to this question, where there's a concern about changing commission schemes, which is often a key driver for people looking elsewhere. How do you mitigate that? How do you overcome that?
I'll answer my thoughts on that. I think part of the reason to do it annually is to stop it becoming this huge fear. And then I think it's twofold for me. It's one, telling people why it's changing, and that, you might be doing it to protect jobs. We anticipate maybe less revenue. Costs are growing in our company. So give it some context why it might be changing. But I think modelling it and having very clear-cut examples of, if you bill X, you will still earn Y, and showing how and what is feasible, I think alleviates that risk. I think often leaders overthink it, make it into this huge drama, and actually it's business, and we just need to be very clear and transparent with it.
I think there's two. I'll just add to that Sam's points in terms of, I think, hoodwinking it in terms of what the scheme is trying to achieve and trying to sell it to people is pointless, because they'll sit there and work it out. So I've been there in the past and sold it to people and gone, like, it's brilliant, it's this, that, and everything else. You need to give examples and be very honest about the behaviour you're trying to drive. We've talked about behaviours. This is the key thing. This is why I've seen so many businesses that have been running the same commission scheme for 5 years without changing, 10 years without changing. The reality is the market's changed and we're still trying to do things exactly the same way, behaviour, as we did back then. The reality is what we need to do is we need to tell people what the behaviours are we're trying to achieve. They'll work it out themselves, so you might as well be honest about it. If you're looking for consistency of billing, there's a bonus in there. I need you to bill every single month in a consistent fashion, rather than what you're doing at the moment. If it's on a monthly commission scheme, you've got 1 month where you're peaking and the next 2 you've got nothing. I can't do that as a business. It doesn't help me. So I'll reward you for consistency of billings. Just be very open and frank about it. Because, I think this is the piece for me in terms of that, having the annual review on commissions, again, just being clear on that. If you've got set structures and you review it, run it through the P&L, model it, take time to make sure it's actually driving the behaviours that you want in the business at the top.
Yeah.
Are they actually driving the right behaviours?
Right. I'm conscious of time. If I just ask you for one thing that you've done either in your own business or within some of your members that's really transformed profitability, productivity, performance, whatever, what's one sort of real life experience you got? And I only say that because I've got one myself only last week from a member who's grown their net fee income by 30%. We've just done a video case study which is on TRM World. If you remember, you can check it out. It's absolutely mind blowing. He shifted from rewarding on net fee income to on interviews. All rewards and incentives around interviews. I'm not saying that's right, but it's worked for him massively. So if you had one thing that you've either implemented yourself or with your members, what's one you can share?
Okay, well, you're not going to like it, but the most successful company I ever worked with as an advisor, and I'm not sure you can do this today, but it made a huge difference. It really part of their DNA. And I think they even had it written into the employee contracts that they were allowed to do it, was they used to staple a copy of the pay slips of their top sales performers on a notice board at the end of every month, so that new people it was very financially led business, and new people coming into this could see that there were in that business on that floor a number of people, and you knew who they were taking home 10 grand a month or more than that, 20 grand a month, because they actually were making commission. That was very public recognition of performance. Financial reward is very financially driven business. It was a hard business to work in as a sales consultant, but it took this business worldwide within 5 years. And the founders of the business made two rounds of exit and made a huge amount of money out of it. So if that's your incentive, I think that was probably the one thing that shocked me when I walked in and saw it, and I thought, you can't do that, that's not right. But they did it, and it was, I would say, right at the heart of their success.
Love it, Mike.
Again, so this is an example linked to a company that wants to drive a certain behaviour, and it's very simplistic. They were doing all of their work at low percentages, so they started paying people out whatever charge they put to the customer, i.e. if it was a 25% perm fee, they paid them 25% commission. And funny enough, it drove a behaviour in terms of actually all of a sudden people who didn't used to negotiate started negotiating, because they knew directly then negotiation would then impact the percentage of the fee that they would get. They had a threshold and they had a certain scheme in place. So again, it was all modelled, it was all focused on in terms of making sure that the payout rates were right on each desk. But by God, did it drive a behaviour, in terms of actually people saying, right, I'm going to try and push for 30%, 27.5%, whatever it may be, rather than what we see often is people just giving it away because they can't be bothered to argue on a PSL, or they can't be bothered to argue around the fact that they're niche and they will walk away from work. So again, this comes back to me in terms of being really clear on what you want to be. Church's point there, if you want to be an organisation which is very money orientated, transfer, it's all about transparency, big billings, etc. Those kind of small things can make a massive difference. Just as much as that example is that business was average fees 1 year were much, much lower than where they ended up the following year, all because of incentivisation and behavioural change.
Finally, Sam?
I think similar to Simon and Mike's point, and if anybody didn't catch it earlier, Simon's advice to have a house margin on house accounts. I took that to one of my members, and it's been transformational. In terms of results, financial results. So yeah, absolutely, introducing a house margin on deal. And then I think the thing that was most transformative for me really talks to Mike's point, which was paying a small margin for new logo business. What I didn't do, however, was put an end date on it, and it cost me a lot of money. But we did win some very big chunky business off the back of that.
All right, Mike, Sam, Churchy, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experience. It's great to have 3 seasoned recruitment leaders on the call for this period. If you are, I remember, go out the TRN world. There's a lot of template commission schemes on there, plus all sorts of data we've extracted from members. If you're not a member, please do come along and join us. We're having conversations like this every day about everything. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the TRN podcast. Thank you for listening. And make sure you grab the free episode toolkit. All the links are in the description. And click follow in your podcast app so you can get notified of our next episode. If you want to get more out of your business and your people, then please unlock 30 days from our platform, TRN World, for free. And help yourself to all our training content, our guides, our templates, and peer insights. You can get started at trnworld.com/trial. And finally, if you found this episode of the TRN podcast of use, please share it with your network and tag TRN on any socials with your takeaways. Otherwise, message us directly if we can help in any way. We do reply to every question. Otherwise, we'll see you next week on the next TRN podcast.